Hello everybody, in this video I'm going to show you the process I use for creating assets for my game Molino in Timelapse. So the art style for the game is based off this idea of doing vector art, and I'll be doing one of these schools, which is the typical Portuguese primary school. And the idea is that I'm not using any textures, I'm only using the vertex colors to create the different shading and the different suggestion of materials. So I'm going to use some of the buildings that already exist, sort of cannibalize them into something that I can use to sort of improve the speed in which I make these. I start with very simple shapes just to get the volume correct. And I use loop cuts here, not only to get the geometry to sort of obey the necessities I have in terms of shape, but also because I need some a certain amount of quantity of vertices to be able to actually paint the vertices in. I was moving the building around there to sort of see if the height of the door made sense. The proportions are, not necessarily very precise, but I still want to make them believable. And even though the character's not going to really move into buildings, it will sort of stand next to them in a way that people could potentially look and say that's not correct. So here I go into my Vertex Color mode, where the object is shaded just with vertex colors. I'm not even displaying lighting at all. And I take the opportunity to suggest a bunch of things like water damage, moss, and sometimes I will even suggest like a little bit of ambient occlusion. The roof is not the final roof. This is just the underside. And I paint this dark clay color because it's going to be sort of poking out through the gaps in between the roof tiles. And the gaps exist not because they're realistic, but because the model itself has a few gaps. It's really not important that they are watertight. I'm trying to figure out here the proportions of the building, and I do struggle a little bit because on the photo that I used, I can actually see the proportions, but then in the model, it feels like they're completely off. So I have to do a little bit of guesswork and, just my own artistic liberties, I suppose. Shading the windows is actually pretty easy. You just get the selection for the vertices that are making up the shape of the window, and then you tint those dark, and that gives you sort of a free gradient coming from the ledge of the window into sort of the glass, and then you can just like repaint the glass in a different color. I'm adding those cuts near the roof there just so I can suggest that little bit of ambient occlusion coming from the roof bit. The underside of the school building has a different shade, which allows me to not only add a little bit of color spice, but also I can extend this part of the geometry down so that it acts as a buffer in case the terrain where I'm going to put this isn't completely flat. I'm also shading the top side of that edge to give it sort of a ledge suggestion, and also just to give it a little bit more depth. Vertex Paint in Max allows you to do different things like having different types of layers with different blending modes, so it actually works pretty similarly to Photoshop. And it's quite useful to just go in and paint a little bit of color and then just use that as a saturation information, for example. I'm suggesting here a little bit of crack on the sort of the clay covering of the walls. I actually don't know what the material is. I'm just going to assume it's clay. I'm not going to assume, I'm just going to make it clay because I think it looks cool. And now I'm looking into sort of creating that suggestion of like the worn edge, but also I'm going to do the pattern for the stone that goes on the side of the building. And it's pretty much the same as you have there on the bell tower for the little chapel. So I start by creating a grid, and then I get rid of every other vertical line, and then I convert those vertical lines into something that has a little bit of thickness. I'm using the noise modifier here to create some variation. I actually have a little too much variation. It's going to come back and bite me later on. Then I just inset and delete the polygons that would make up those cells and use that as my sort of texture for, or not texture, but pattern for the sort of for the grout in between the stones that are stacked. They're pretty rectangular stone blocks, and they are stacked on, I suppose, clay, which is then painted with lime wash, I think it is. Not completely sure. So I'm also changing the pattern here to sort of match the geometry of the building that already exists, because I don't want to move things too much. And I do need some of the white lines to actually go through certain spaces, because that will match it up to what the reference is, but also to what the building would be in terms of like how it was constructed. I'm going to crop the excess here from the side panel from the actually entryway of the building. This part, I'm really not sure. I didn't go to a school like this when I was a kid. When I was a kid, the school like this was already like a different building. It was already changed to something else. But I do think that these are like the bathrooms, and there is very small windows. And then there's a little flower planter on the edge there, which I then can add the plants in engine rather than having to model them right now. Again, even within the same model, I sort of cannibalize parts to sort of like tidy up certain parts of the model to make it more and more like the actual thing. This is just the big slab of stone that I got from a different building, and I'm used that as like a ledge for both the windows, but also that top part of the entry structure. I think it's like a load-bearing kind of thing. And I'm going to also take the roof. Because the chapel has a certain curve to it, the roof also comes with that curve. So I need to use the freeform deformation modifiers to sort of remove the curve that I added before. Also, depending on what type of building it is, that there are variations on this. Not all of the school buildings have a lot of water overhang. Some of them have actual sort of cement or concrete frames around the roofs. Others are really not that different. There's a little bit of a structure for a flagpole, but I'm also using that sort of stone to use as a sort of the steps to get into the building. I also changed the color a little bit, again with a layer for Vertex Color, but with a saturation blending mode. And the flagpole, I'm just going to color pick some of the green I have over here a couple of times, the lighter and dark. And I'm also going to sort of hijack a little piece of electronics connector from the power tower. And then I just start like fiddling with the sort of the actual pivot points, adding a little bit more buffer to the geometry and getting it ready to be exported. I also create the window frames, and that's just like getting a plane that's been tessellated, deleting the inside, and then doing a little bit of just changing the color slightly. It does look a little bit like a jail cell, but I think in the whole thing, it's actually not going to be too complicated to put in. So the school is going to go somewhere over here. I put it here, but I think I move it up a stair. But I put it over there because this is kind of like the place where it's going to be. And all of these like steps on the world are actually temporary. It's just so we could like test some physics and see if the player can actually ride over there. And adding the collision boxes to make sure that we would have sort of believable collisions. As I noticed that the building is floating, so I just move stuff down a little bit. And when I resave, stuff just moves, so I just have to readjust the collisions. So here we go with our bicycle to see the building. And actually the scale is pretty okay. I do notice that from that angle, this pattern is too exaggerated. So I go back and fix it and make it like a little bit straighter. And yeah, it feels a little bit better now, except that we're missing a bottom edge of grout because like the stone would have to sit on something. So there we are. I also think I play a little bit with the day-night cycle actually going really fast, so you can see how the light is affecting. And that was it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, that you liked it, and I'll see you some other time. Take care.